38 minutes. Huh. But I'm looking at the article itself, page 445. Oh, on the top, I wrote it as a note, and this isn't from the text, but one of my favorite lines about Nietzsche, from Nietzsche, was, "Do you think you understand me?" Question mark. And that's a whole thing where Nietzsche criticizes people for thinking that they understand what Nietzsche is trying to say.
Well, he wouldn't be criticizing me.
Because what in a sense he's trying to say is that to have power, you're trying to manipulate others. And so in a sense, all of this is an act of persuasion and so on. And so so in the sense that we say you're just putting on an act, is that what you really mean? Do you really mean this, or are you just pretending to mean that for this particular occasion, right? And so in a sense, Nietzsche criticizes anyone who thinks that they understand Nietzsche. But Madonna does the same thing, because if you are the Übermensch, you want to be in control of, the little people, the herd. He calls it the herd, right? You want the herd to go this way. You're trying to get them to go to this town for butchering or whatever, right? So you're in charge of the herd. You don't want the herd to be in charge of you. So Madonna, I remember, every time she would, come with a new show or whatever, she would do different things and try to appear a different way. Because if she had to behave the way the people expected her, then she's no longer in power over them. They're in power over her, right? So the Übermensch can never be being controlled by their fans. You have to always be leading them on to something else, right? Remember how Madonna, she's, the material girl, some boys kiss me, some boys hug me, I think they're okay, yay. As long as they give me proper credit, I don't run away, yay. Because we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. Right?
Your YouTube works now.
Pardon?
Your YouTube works again, right?
Yeah, I should throw that up there. Diamonds are a girl's best friend, and all that, So, but then she becomes the American girl, then she becomes a mother, the best mother the world has ever seen, writes books, so she keeps, reinventing herself, and then she then is in power, right? Same thing with the artist, same thing with the politician. That's I don't know that Trump has ever read any Nietzsche, but in a sense, he's got that same kind of, constantly wanting to be in the media, constantly being contentious, he's absolutely fantastic at getting the media attention and being the focus of everybody's discussion. It's just absolutely incredible.
Would you say that seems to be somewhat of a pattern with those who have somewhat of a narcissistic and enigmatic type personality, the ones who want to be mysterious, the ones who want to keep you guessing all the time, and sometimes they do things because they want the attention, they want to be the center, they want to wow you. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't studied enough of Nietzsche to understand that perhaps he might fall in that category of not wanting to be controlled, wanting people to figure him out,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He seems to be that way. I can't help. I think of myself as being somewhat like that too. I want people to love my classes and to love philosophy because I communicate so well how interesting it is. But I don't think I'd have been a good teacher if I didn't. want to do that. But at the same time, I was raised Roman Catholic, so I feel guilty about everything, which, I mean, I would feel guilty if I didn't feel guilty about things, because, original sin and all that, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, I know all of that stuff. I believe it completely. But at the same time, you still want to be popular. I'm wearing my dad's tie. And I just recently scanned a picture of my dad when he was standing next to his mom while wearing this tie, and that was kind of pretty neat. 'Cause I've been scanning a whole bag of old photos that I realized I still had. But page 446, no categorical imperative, or do the categorical imperative rather. What is that? That's because in this paragraph he says it is not possible, however, that the necessity may now have arisen of again making up our minds with regard to the reversing and fundamental shifting of values, etc. So if you're looking at that particular paragraph, there's a reference to Kant's categorical imperative. We haven't done any Kant yet, so keep that in mind when we do Kant, where that reference is. Intention morality has been a prejudice. For some reason I wrote Black Lives Matter in the middle of the paragraph on the right on page 446. I underlined there's far too much witchery and sugar in the sentiments for others and not for myself. Of course, remember he was raised Lutheran. Lutherans are particularly depressing. If you ever watch Prairie Home Companion, he does a great job. What's his name? The Prairie Home, Garrison Keillor. He's great. It gives you such a great impression of what Lutherans are like, and especially in Lake Wobegon, which is a fake town, by the way. Did Nietzsche despise Darwin? That really surprised me. I read, I think it was Rudiger Safransky that said that.
You despise what?
Darwin.
Darwin.
And yet so this is one of those odd things. He accepts Darwin's thesis.
I just said garlic.
Garlic.
Oh,
Okay.
that's interesting.
So he accepts the Darwinian theory of evolution, but maybe not specifically Darwin's version of it. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe Herbert Spencer more than Darwin, maybe. And I think it's especially the idea of man evolving from apes was perhaps what he despised, but I don't remember exactly.
Did Darwin premise that? He pretty much concentrated on Galapagos finches.
Right,
Did the ape
right,
stuff come
but
after that? After
the origin of the species is that's the one that was published in 1859, but he wrote other things after that, and
Okay.
and so you get the idea that there was he talked about it upside down from the way we do today. So instead of I forget how he expressed it, but so it's like you're going downwards on the tree instead of up, but it's still expanding that way. But really, if we're talking about our contemporary view of evolution, Darwin is like passé in a lot of ways, because contemporary evolution doesn't really accept a lot of what Darwin said. Remember, Darwin was before the development with regard to the way genes work and DNA and the double helix. All that stuff came much later. And there's also Lamarck. If you're familiar with Lamarckian evolution, Lamarck was an earlier contemporary of Darwin, and he believed that there's basically a intelligence behind the direction of evolution. And today there's a lot of folks that talk about that. You don't have chance evolution. It's like the next generation of finches are going to be already predisposed to eat the seeds that are going to grow on the trees that next generation, right? So somehow there's a coordination between the development of the species and the development of their environment. It's not chance, random chance. It's like directed towards a certain goal. And the same thing with regard to the way humans developed, etc. We wouldn't have developed the way we have if there had been random chances throughout our history. Instead, it seems like evolution knew what it was doing. That's kind of Lamarckian, right? So there's and that, not Darwin. Darwin didn't think that. He thought it was just randomness, right? So, and
Didn't he finish his book stating that he thought there was a higher being? The very end of Origin of Species, but maybe he retracted that later in later works. I haven't gone further than that, but I'm familiar with him making that statement. Though he made all these premises, he said, I'm astounded with all this, and paraphrase that there still must be a
remember, he
supreme being or
originally
something like that.
was studying to be a minister.
I think Darwin was a Christian, and his second book was The Descent of Man, in which
Descent, that's the word I couldn't
In which he
remember.
was
Descent,
Yeah.
yeah.
and he remained believing in God.
Of course, the problem is you're looking through the filter of people that are critics that want him not to be and want him to be. So if you read someone who's absolutely convinced he wasn't, they're going to say no, he never said that. If you're, and can you trust them? I don't think you could trust any of them to know absolutely for sure, but nor can you trust the ones that say yes, he was absolutely still a Christian at death. I don't think, read Richard Dawkins. He's absolutely convinced Darwin was an atheist. But do you trust Richard Dawkins? Even George Washington, I've read books about George Washington, whether he was a Christian or...
So I didn't know that Dawkins believed that Darwin was an atheist. I'm going to look at that.
well, that's because Dawkins thinks highly of Darwin.
Well, and I might be wrong.
Is that a mouse?
It was my belief that Darwin maintained his belief in God, and that he thought that maybe God started it all, and then evolution just continued from there, and that God understood when somehow humans became human and breathed without God. But I will look that up, because I'm curious.
Yeah, let me know, because I think I have everything Richard Dawkins ever wrote that was published, in fact, 2 copies of his The Selfish Gene, because there's a new edition of that. But don't tell my wife, because she hates him. She won't allow me to buy any of his stuff. Actually, I haven't bought any of his newer things, because we got to that point where our house would no longer fit any more books, and so we've been getting rid of them ever since, instead of buying new ones.
You need to build an extra room then.
Or something. We did rent a unit down in public storage for the summer, and I've still got about 8 bags left in there to get out before our thing uses up at the 10th. Okay, well, I could There were more underlines and stuff if you wanted to go over them. The selfish gene I mentioned actually on page 448 in my note. Granted finally that we succeeded in explaining our entire instinctive life as the development and ramification of one fundamental form of will, namely the will to power, as my thesis puts it. Granted that all organic functions should be traced back to this will to power, etc. And I thought, selfish gene, I don't know why. Hitler, triumph of the will. Remember I mentioned that last class, showed even some of it. The Leni Riefenstahl propaganda film that was made in Nuremberg talks about the will, etc. Okay, so let's move on to St. Anselm. Totally different. I mean, now we're looking at St. Anselm, who's medieval, and a monk, and a bishop, archbishop, actually, I believe. And there's Anselm colleges all over. I don't want the college, though. What? Looks like I still got the college somehow. Even if I go to the Franciscan media, I bet it's Saint Anselm. I want the saint. Give me the saint. How come they're only giving me other things?
I watched a talk from Richard Dawkins recently, and if I believe I remember correctly, he mentioned that he saw Darwin as an atheist, lifelong atheist, who made a mistake, the deathbed confession of his faith, and that it didn't count, was his position, if I remember correctly. I remember that being particularly funny. It doesn't count.
Well,
Okay.
like,
Alright.
obviously Darwin, I mean, Dawkins has his favorites, and
Yes.
Darwin is clearly one of his favorites. A.C. Grayling too. There's a lot of British, that love Darwin. They feel like, yes,
Go.
and so they'll interpret any opportunity to say, what X do I have to hit to get rid of it here? I wanted Wikipedia, but instead I got something else. But that's okay. So St. Anselm, he's not from Canterbury, he's from Italy. It says he's Italian born, right? But the Pope sent him to Canterbury to be the Archbishop. And this is when William the Conqueror is the King of England. And that causes a lot of conflict between them, which is really kind of fun to think about too, is the Archbishop of Canterbury is really the Pope's emissary. And if you think about the way in the Middle Ages things were, it was really one church. And of course the one church ruled essentially from Rome, unless you were in the East, Byzantium, Constantinople. The Eastern Orthodox, that's of course a separate church at the time. But the Roman Pope is not just a church bishop, he's also a physical leader, ruler basically of Europe, wants to be in charge. But of course all of the kings of their various principalities want to be in charge and don't want to listen to the Pope. And of course they don't have the internet, they don't have telephone, they don't have radio. This is Middle Ages. The only way for you to get a message is by horse, or wagon, right? So poor Archbishop Anselm, literally, whenever he and William disagree about something, William says, well, go check with the Pope. And so Anselm literally has to ride all the way back to Rome from England, you know, so that's sailing across the channel, not very safe, you know. Well, you know that if you remember the movie Frozen, right? You know, not safe to. Let it go, right? So he goes back and forth, I think about 5 times, you know, which, you know, takes like a year each time. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a long, they didn't have highways, they didn't have an Autobahn,
Probably his me time.
you know,
He gets some time away.
he
from life.
loved the one, was it Cluny, I think was the monastery, that he had been the abbot before he was appointed to be the archbishop.
So he wouldn't send anybody
You know,
with a sealed
could he
document?
have, or was he just absolutely glad as heck to get out of there? You know, no, get out of. So, but I think it was the monastery of Cluny, which was like, oh, that was like, you know, Microsoft, you know, their headquarters in, you know, at the time.
Is that southern France, Cluny?
Is it, where is
I
it?
don't remember.
It's only 1,000 years.
Saint-Delois department, which I don't, Burgundy, so that's
Oh, no.
more north.
We're not writing anything down anymore. It's all on data banks. Better hope there's no power outage.
East Central France. I guess you can still visit it, I guess. Yeah, so he gave up a posh position to do the Pope's bidding and go to England. And the conflict between him and William was especially over William's treatment of the Saxons. Because Anselm was the archbishop for all the people, including the Saxons, so all the things that William wanted to do because he wanted all of their stuff and everything else, Anselm stood in the way and wouldn't let him do it. And that pissed off William, who basically thought, yeah, I conquered this country, I want it, you know, but he's now the king of it, and so he has to rule for the sake of the Saxons as well as the Normans. And so that was the source of the main conflict between